Well, I must admit, when I got the invitation to speak today, as we all did as fellows, I took it as, I translated it as, speak about whatever you like for 10 minutes. So I've picked quite a random topic. This is something I feel very passionately about. I have done a little bit of academic work around, but it's something that I think we should all be aware of. And so my aim today is for you to just go away with a few more questions in your mind. I'm not necessarily going to give you the answers, so please just bear that in mind as I go through this talk. So the first thing I want to get you to do is to enter a time capsule. Students, you won't need to go into a time capsule because you are where I'm going to talk about at the moment. I want you to enter a time capsule and go back to when you were a vet student and just think about, what did you learn without actually realising it? What did you learn without sitting in a classroom? What did you pick up from your peers, from others around you, from the institution you were existing in? Just think about that for a second while I show you this rather embarrassing picture. This is Dick Vet Class of 2000, so next year I'll have my 20-year reunion. I'll let you sit there and decide which one is me. I'll give you a clue. I'm not the one with the great reuse of kitchen materials on my head, so I don't have a colander on my head, but I am in that picture. And really the purpose of that is, as I say, to get you to think about what you learnt without realising it. So if I think about my own education, I most definitely learnt nearly all my professional skills, nearly all my ability to deal with challenging clients, to talk to clients about money, to deal in the practice situation with the team and work with nurses. You know, none of that was delivered to me in the classroom. Of course, we have moved on a little bit now, and we do try and deliver some of those things to our students. But actually, you know, these things are happening all the time. There is this inherent thing that is going on behind our formal education. And in actual fact, if you think about the concept of a curriculum, there are multiple layers to that curriculum. So, of course, we have the formal curriculum, the bit where we do put students into classrooms, or if you're in a workplace, you have students around you, or anybody around you, really, who is learning and developing. And we know you are actively teaching them. Teaching is an active process in that context. We then have what we call the informal curriculum, which sits slightly behind the formal curriculum, and is those kind of things that we don't write down that we're teaching. So, you know, there's sort of off-the-hoof type moments where perhaps, you know, you bump into a student approaches you at the end of a lecture, asks you something, a nurse comes up to you at the end of a clinic and says, oh, I was interested in that. So those extra bits and pieces that we teach behind the scenes. But then over the top of all of this, really, and permeating through everything we teach, is this concept of the hidden curriculum. This is what we don't realise as professionals who are learning that we are actually learning, unless we stop and really reflect on the environment in which we are existing. So embarrassing pictures over, a bit of academic now. So I've written down a quote because I knew I wouldn't remember it. So this obviously has been researched quite extensively in many different fields, particularly in professional medical education. One of my great heroes of medical professionalism is a chap called Fred Hafferty, and he talks about the hidden curriculum as a set of influences that function at the level of organisational structure and culture, understandings, customs, rituals, and taken for granted aspects of what goes on in the life space we call education. So I think that sort of encapsulates what I'm talking about. And he goes on to divide it into several different areas. So things like the way we develop policy, how we apply those policies, the way we evaluate each other, students, learners, in whatever environment you are teaching in, the way we allocate resources, the way we make decisions as leaders about who gets what and why. And then the institutional slang, the language that we use in all our workplaces and in all our education environments, that all permeates through this hidden curriculum. And when I did some work around this, I took this idea of the cultural web, which is very much from organisational business literature, and used these categories to try and think about what was existing in a hidden curriculum in which I was working. And it was really fascinating to try and look at these areas, and it's worth thinking about it in your own context. What is it that you are learning just by being in that environment? And how do those things fit into these categories? In particular, I would ask you to reflect on your influence as a role model, which is not specifically labelled in this diagram, because actually role models exist throughout all these things. The way we act as leaders, the way we act as fellows within our profession is influencing those around us, and that's always really important to remember. It doesn't mean we have to be angelic all of the time. It just means we have to think about it. So why does this matter? Well, for anyone who is interested in the concept of the hidden curriculum, this is all heading towards what we call professional identity formation. And if you'd like to read more about this, I would thoroughly recommend some of Liz Chan's papers from the RVC. So in effect, we enter any environment. It may be an educational environment, it may be a workplace, with obviously a pre-existing set of a personal identity and some values. We then go through this process of socialisation, and as that happens, we're kind of negotiating subconsciously with what we see happening around us. We're thinking about, is this something I want to do? Is this something I don't want to do, without even realising it? Is this a way I want to behave? Is this a value I want to adopt? And then at the end of this process, which obviously is continuing anyway, it's a very confusing arrow, we end up with this professional and indeed a personal identity. So that's what's going on. And in many ways, this is all about who are you, why are you here? You know, why are we here? What are we doing? And who is shaping how we're behaving? So that's a sort of very simple way to put it. And of course, it is a much more complex picture than that overall. The other thing to remember is that this exists in many contexts. So I mentioned workplaces, I mentioned educational institutions, but it also is the case for what we do on social media. I'm a great fan of social media. I think it's a hugely powerful tool. I use it in my teaching, and part of the reason why I do that is because I think it's really important to role model what a hugely positive thing it can be, rather than focusing on the negative aspects of social media, and demonstrating to students how we should be using it professionally and in the right way to learn from each other. So that's social media. I also wanted you to think a little bit, another question for you, to think about some hot topics at the moment in our profession, and reflect on perhaps that broad hidden curriculum concept across the whole of our profession within these areas. So let's just think about the challenges we're going through at the moment as a profession with looking after our own mental health. So just reflect for a minute on how you demonstrate your own ability to do that to those around you, how perhaps your organisation supports or doesn't support mental health in yourself and in others, and what that means to those who are perhaps more vulnerable in that context. The second challenge I would give you is that of equality, diversity and inclusivity. What are we doing in our profession to ensure that we are an inclusive profession? There's quite a lot happening, which is fantastic news. But we need to live and breathe these things as well as write policy. We need to demonstrate as the leaders in our profession what we mean by EDI, why it's important to us, why we should be passionate about it. And then the third thing, because it's a personal interest of mine I wanted to touch on, is the idea of an error and a blame culture. And in fact, translating that and converting that into the idea of a just culture in clinical practice, where actually, if we make mistakes, we look at it the proper way, and we don't just point fingers and lay blame. So what does all this mean? Well, you get a nice picture of my dog to finish off with. I'm pleased with that picture. I didn't take it, sadly. But the whole point about the hidden curriculum is that we cannot sterilise it, and that would actually be the last thing that we'd want to do. Can you imagine if we put our students through vet school in a very sterile, perfect environment where everything was done to the utmost professional elements, and students didn't have any opportunity to see that that was not real life? That would not be a good thing. So we know the hidden curriculum is never going to be perfect. And therefore, what we need to do is make sure there is an awareness of it in those around us and in yourself. And so develop this ability to be reflective practitioners, to think about what we're launching ourselves into, to think about how we are behaving, how that is influencing others around us, and then to take that forwards in our daily lives and encourage our students to do the same. I'd like to finish with a Donald Rumsfeld quote. As we know, there are known knowns. Then we know that these are things that we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know that there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. Things we don't know, we don't know. Thank you very much.